Freedom of speech is a founding value of American society. It's one of the few means by which we're able to grow intellectually and morally as individuals. And it's one of the key components of any functioning democratic society. As a multiracial man, I take this very seriously. Were it not for people who raise their voices and exercise their First Amendment rights in streets, in storefronts, in courtrooms, and in classrooms in the 1950s and 60s, I would not be alive today. My parents couldn't have legally married, let alone without the threat of lethal persecution. But more than that, I owe all my friendships to open, free discourse. Take, for example, Shannon Boley, my best friend at Hamilton College. When we got here, Shannon was a politically and religiously conservative Catholic from Western Massachusetts, and I was a gay liberal firebrand from Washington, D.C., who grew up around more former Black Panthers than Republicans. There wasn't much more we could have disagreed on if we'd wanted to, but we were both willing to have awkward, intense, sometimes painful conversations, and by doing so, we forged a friendship that spanned the experiential and political gap between us and that daily draws the edges of that gap closer together. I owe my existence and the relationships that make it worthwhile to free speech. So when I am asked in any context whether anybody should limit it, my simple answer is an emphatic no. But this isn't a simple question, and before we can answer it fully, we have to talk about who's asking it and why. Take, for example, the Thomas Jefferson Center. This is a website that was cited in the prompt for our speeches that purports to aggregate instances of censorship on American college campuses on a year-to-year basis. Curiously, the center has nothing to say about cases like that of Landon Gambill, the University of North Carolina rape survivor who was threatened with expulsion for intimidating her rapist by speaking about the assault, even though she never said his name. It has nothing to say about Dan Adamini, the Republican Party official who advocated for another Kent state for shooting and killing college protesters to quell Black Lives Matter activism. And while it's not necessarily surprising that a center named after Thomas Jefferson would be fine with rape and racism, we do have to discuss why the modern free speech conversation focuses so often around conservative white male voices. Of course, the intuitive question is, are conservatives really being censored in these numbers? Is there really an epidemic of liberal authoritarianism on college campuses in the United States? The Thomas Jefferson Center aggregated 30 examples of so-called censorship on American college campuses in 2016. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, that same year, 20.5 million people attended American institutions of higher education. Clearly, this isn't an actual problem. So why are we making a mountain out of a molehill? Who stands to gain from this hustle? Well, for an answer, you really only have to look at how the Thomas Jefferson Center frames its discussion of censorship. You see, of those 30 cases in 2016, only 6 actually involved tangible repercussions against an individual or organization. They simply view any vocal expression of disagreement from any party as an attack on First Amendment rights. Now, if we buy into that, that lands us in an awkward catch-22, right? How do we protect the free speech of conservatives without cracking down on the free speech of liberals? And that's the goal. It's to force our institutions to choose a side. And this is taking place on a national scale, and you only have to look at the legislation that's being proposed to see how dangerous this rhetoric really is. Take, for example, religious freedom bills. Passed in 5 states across the country, these legalize segregation against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals in the name of restoring First Amendment religious freedom rights. Take, for example, the 18 states that have proposed bills to criminalize peaceful protest in the wake of Black Lives Matter activism in the name of protecting the public interest. If you are in Minnesota or Iowa, your legislators are contemplating legislation that would impose draconian penalties on any protester found blocking a highway. In Washington, conservative legislators have proposed a piece of law that would designate any form of protest that causes any sort of potential economic damage as a Class C felony, economic terrorism. Now, you may have noticed that had these bills been in effect half a century ago, Martin Luther King would have been a felon and a terrorist rotting in prison if he hadn't been flattened on a North Dakota highway first, because lawmakers in that state have legalized running over and killing protesters on highways if no one can prove that you did it on purpose. So we can see, this rhetoric is really dangerous. It's hazardous. It's designed to help conservatives play the victims so that they can claim the rights of other people, that they can oppress other populations. What does that mean for Hamilton College? Really, it's quite simple. Our college needs to take every available step to take stock of whose rights are really being threatened and ensure that every member of our community is able to speak their mind and to challenge others who do the same. Our institution is an educational institution. It does not exist to validate every viewpoint regardless of its intellectual and ethical merit. It is not supposed to maintain neutrality at the cost of legitimizing misinformation and ignorance. We all come here to learn. Hamilton College demands growth and change from each and every one of us on moral and intellectual levels. How are we to accomplish that change without challenge? It is more important now than ever that colleges take every available step to ensure not only that we are allowed to disagree, but that they encourage us to do so. Every member of our community has to be willing to speak their mind, to be challenged on their own stances, and to defend them. And those who are unwilling to do so are free to seek an environment that does not ask it of them.